The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then, click, the sound of handcuffs snapped across the wrist of a man who had never heard that sound in his life. A man who believed money could buy him out of anything, even justice. Brandon Whitmore, 33 years old, heir to a $600 million construction empire, born into luxury, polished by privilege, and shielded by lawyers since the day he learned to drive. His father built buildings that shaped skylines. Brandon? He built an ego that could scrape the heavens. But on this cold December morning in Providence, Rhode Island, that ego was about to come crashing down, right in front of Judge Frank Caprio. For years, Brandon had walked through life untouchable. 3 times before, he had been arrested for driving drunk. 3 times, the law had been in his favor. Expensive lawyers, quick settlements, probation instead of prison. Each time, he walked out smiling, convinced that the rules were for other people. But then, something happened that no one expected. 6 weeks ago, on a quiet residential street, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Brandon's Ferrari tore through the night. Red lights blurred past at 120 miles an hour. His blood alcohol level? 0.19%. More than double the legal limit. He could have killed a family asleep in their home. He could have taken a life. But when the flashing blue lights appeared behind him, Brandon didn't stop. Not immediately, because in his world, laws were suggestions and consequences were optional. The arrest report read like a movie script. A $500,000 Ferrari, a smell of champagne and vodka, and one arrogant heir refusing sobriety test. And now, for the 4th time, he was due in court. 4th time, the number that turns arrogance into reckoning. But Brandon wasn't nervous. He arrived in a custom Brioni suit worth $15,000, Berluti shoes polished to a mirror shine, and a Richard Mille watch worth $500,000, glinting like a statement. I am above you. He parked illegally in front of the courthouse, in a spot marked official vehicles only. When the security guard shouted that he couldn't park there, Brandon didn't even turn around. He just waved his hand, as if brushing away an insect. That single gesture said everything about him. He wasn't coming to face justice. He was coming to perform superiority. What Brandon didn't know was that the man behind the bench that day, Judge Frank Caprio, had spent a lifetime watching arrogance walk through his courtroom doors. And he had something Brandon had never met before, a kind of quiet strength that no money could move. This was not going to be another easy day for the Whitmore family. Not this time, because this was a day when privilege met principle, and the collision would be unforgettable. Stay with me, because what happens next will remind you why Judge Caprio is not just respected, he's revered, and why, for once in his life, Brandon Whitmore would realize that even $600 million can't buy freedom from justice. It was December 19th, 6 days before Christmas. The courthouse in Providence buzzed with rare warmth that winter mornings rarely carried. Court officers joked softly near the doors. Clerks whispered about family dinners and holiday shopping. But that faint joy, that sense of normalcy, was about to freeze in the air. Because at exactly 10:05 a.m., Brandon Whitmore walked through those doors. He entered like a man arriving at a business meeting. He couldn't be bothered to attend. A $15,000 suit, hair styled by the best salon in Boston, diamond cufflinks flashing under the courthouse lights. Everything about him screamed control, except one thing. He had no idea he was walking into the one courtroom in America where control didn't come from money. It came from character. Behind the bench sat Judge Frank Caprio, 77 years old, wise, calm, and steady as oak. His courtroom wasn't just a place for verdicts. It was a place for lessons. And today, a lesson was waiting for Brandon. Before the session even began, Brandon's lawyer, Vincent Sterling, a man who had seen miracles happen in courtrooms, tried one last time to guide him. Brandon, he said, voice low, anxious, listen to me, be respectful. Address the judge as your honor. Keep your phone away. Show remorse. You're on thin ice this time. But Brandon barely heard him. He was too busy scrolling through Instagram, chuckling at photos of his friends on private jets to Aspen. Vincent sighed. He'd represented Brandon 3 times before. Each time, the system bent, barely, but it bent, and each time, Brandon came out smoother than before. Today, though, something felt different. There was a weight in the air, an unseen judgment waiting to fall. When the clerk called the room to order, everyone stood. Everyone except Brandon. Lost his phone again, he didn't move until Vincent elbowed him sharply in the ribs. He stood late, half-heartedly muttering, "Relax. It's just court." That tiny act, that careless delay, was enough for Judge Caprio to glance up and take note. He didn't say a word. Not yet, but behind those calm eyes. He had seen this kind of man before, the kind who believed respect was optional. For the next hour, Judge Caprio handled a dozen small cases. Parking tickets, speeding fines. Each defendant stood nervously, answered politely, and left humbled. Brandon? He yawned, checked his phone again, whispered about his car, even slipped one AirPod into his ear until Vincent ripped it out. Then finally, the clerk called his name. State of Rhode Island versus Brandon Whitmore. Fourth offense, driving under the influence. The room seemed to shift. Even the hum of the old ceiling fan felt quieter, because everyone in that courtroom, from the clerk to the prosecutor, knew that name. The prosecutor, Jennifer Martinez, had handled hundreds of DUI cases, and she'd handled them before. 3 times, she'd watched Brandon's money erase his mistakes. But today, she looked at him differently, like a woman finally ready to make justice mean something again. She stood and began. "Your Honor, the defendant was arrested 6 weeks ago, driving at 120 miles per hour in a 35 zone, blood alcohol level 0.19. This is his 4th offense. His previous 3 convictions resulted in probation and fines. The state believes he presents a serious danger to the public and must face full consequences under the law." But Brandon wasn't listening. His thumbs danced across his gold-plated iPhone. His eyes never left the screen. He didn't even look up when Judge Caprio began reading his case file, until the judge's voice, usually gentle, patient, cut through the air like a crack of thunder. "Mr. Whitmore." No answer. "Mr. Whitmore." Brandon looked up slowly, annoyed, like a man interrupted from a trivial task. "Yes," he said. "No, Your Honor." No apology. Just one careless syllable that hit the room like an insult. That was the moment the air changed. Judge Caprio's expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. "Mr. Whitmore, is there something on that phone more important than the fact that you're facing a year in state prison?" Brandon sighed audibly. Then, with the smirk of a man who'd never faced a real consequence, he said the words that would change his life. "Look, Judge, with all due respect, we both know how this ends. My lawyer and the prosecutor will sort out. I'll pay whatever fine, maybe take some boring class again, and we can all go home. So maybe we can speed this up? I've got a lunch at the Providence Oyster Bar in an hour." For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one even breathed, because in 30 seconds, Brandon Whitmore had just destroyed every ounce of mercy in that room. Prosecutor Martinez's lips curled into the faintest smile. Vincent Sterling's face drained of color. And Judge Frank Caprio, the man who had forgiven thousands before, looked at Brandon with the calm, dangerous stillness of a storm about to break. What came next would make every person in that courtroom remember this day for the rest of their lives. Because for the first time, money had finally met its match. The silence that followed Brandon's words was deafening. Even the old clock on the courtroom wall seemed to stop ticking. Judge Caprio didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at Brandon, really looked at him, the way a teacher looks at a student who's just failed the easiest test of his life. Then, in a calm voice that carried more weight than any shout, he said, "Mr. Whitmore, you just made the biggest mistake of your privileged life." A faint murmur rippled through the courtroom. Brandon shifted, confused, not yet realizing what he'd done. He'd walked into this place expecting control, but he was about to lose it piece by piece. The judge leaned forward slightly, his tone steady but cold enough to chill the air. "You seem to think this is just another inconvenience, that your father's money and your lawyers will make this go away, just like the last 3 times. But this is my courtroom, Mr. Whitmore, and I don't care who your father is. I care about the law. and the law doesn't bend for arrogance. Brandon blinked. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. He looked toward his lawyer, Vincent, who sat frozen, pale as marble. But it was too late. The avalanche had begun. Judge Caprio turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Martinez, withdraw any plea offer immediately. Jennifer Martinez stood taller. Gladly, Your Honor. Brandon's head jerked up. Wait, what? The judge didn't flinch. I will not allow another deal that turns justice into a privilege. I am ordering this case to a full trial. The words hit like thunder. People in the courtroom exchanged looks. Even the officers at the back straightened in disbelief, because they all knew what that meant. Brandon was no longer buying his way out. Your Honor, Vincent began, desperate to save his client. But Judge Caprio cut him off. Counselor, I have been doing this for 38 years. I have seen remorse. I have seen guilt. But I have never seen someone stand before me so openly contemptuous of the law, and I will not reward it. Brandon's smirk began to fade. His hands, once casually resting on the podium, now gripped its edge. You can't do that, he snapped, voice rising. I have rights. Judge Caprio's tone didn't change. If anything, it became softer, deadlier. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, you do, and one of them is a right to face a full trial in custody. Brandon froze. In custody? What do you mean? I mean, the judge said, voice cutting clean and sharp, I am revoking your bail effective immediately. Sheriff, take him into custody until trial. Every sound in the room vanished except for one, the metallic click of handcuffs. That single sound echoed like a verdict in itself. Brandon's face turned red, then white. You can't be serious. I have an important lunch. Your lunch, Judge Caprio interrupted, will have to wait. Justice doesn't serve on your schedule. Laughter nearly broke in the back of the courtroom, but everyone held it in. Brandon's arrogance was dissolving before their eyes. As Officer Robertson approached with handcuffs in hand, Brandon stepped back instinctively. The man who once walked with swagger now stumbled. His voice cracked. Please, Judge, I didn't mean any disrespect. I thought this would be like before. Judge Caprio leaned back, his eyes unflinching. And that, he said quietly, is exactly the problem. The handcuffs closed around Brandon's wrists. Cold metal met warm skin. And for the first time, Brandon felt something he hadn't felt in years. Powerlessness. His $500,000 Richard Mille watch gleamed beneath the cuffs, a symbol of everything that had protected him until now. And now meant nothing at all. Vincent tried again, desperation in his voice. Your Honor, with all due respect, my client has strong community ties. He's not a flight risk. The judge raised his hand. Counselor, your client's greatest risk isn't flight. It's believing he's above accountability. The courtroom stayed frozen in that moment. No one looked away, because they were witnessing something rare, the fall of entitlement. Brandon was led toward the side door, his protests echoing faintly behind him. Please, I have a family, a company. Judge Caprio didn't respond. He simply turned a page in his docket and said calmly, next case. But no one was listening to the next case, because what they had just seen would echo across Rhode Island for weeks. The son of a billionaire, humbled by justice itself. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, whispering about what they'd heard. Judge Caprio denied bail. Fourth DI. Finally, accountability. And somewhere deep inside a cold holding cell that night, Brandon Whitmore sat staring at the wall, realizing for the first time that money can't buy mercy. But this was only the beginning, because inside that cell, arrogance was about to meet consequence. And in the weeks to come, Brandon would face something far more terrifying than prison bars, self-reflection. Stay with me, because what happens next will prove that sometimes justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It begins there. The iron door shut behind him with a hollow clang. That sound, heavy, final, echoing through the cold corridor, would stay with Brandon Whitmore for the rest of his life. He was no longer the heir to a $600 million empire. He was inmate number 54721. And for the first time, there was no assistant, No driver. No father's lawyer waiting outside to fix things. Just silence, concrete, and consequence. Inside the Rhode Island Correctional Facility, the lights flickered with a pale glow. The air smelled of metal and bleach. Nothing like the cedar and cologne of Brandon's mansion. His cell was 8 by 10 feet, with 2 bunks, a narrow toilet, and walls scratched with the names of men who'd been forgotten. The guard spoke sharply. "Top bunk's yours." Brandon didn't move. He was frozen. The shock hadn't worn off yet. "Did you hear me?" He nodded, climbed up, and sat there staring at the cold metal bars, his $500,000 watch gone, his name now reduced to a number. That first night, he barely slept. The noise was constant, metal clanging, distant shouting, the rhythm of a world without rest. He thought about the courtroom, about Judge Caprio's words. "Justice doesn't serve on your schedule." They echoed in his head, over and over, until he stopped trying to fight them. The courtroom was silent again. That same heavy, charged silence that falls right before truth arrives. Brandon Whitmore stood at the podium, hands cuffed, shoulders lowered, the gleam of arrogance finally gone. Only the echo of fear remained. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses, studying the papers before him, then lifted his gaze toward Brandon. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of that room. "Mr. Whitmore," he began, "this is your fourth conviction for driving under the influence. Each time before, you received mercy, probation, fines, classes. Each time, the court gave you the benefit of the doubt. And each time, you took that mercy as proof that the law bends for privilege." Brandon's eyes glistened. His lips trembled. But Judge Caprio didn't soften. His voice carried the calm force of a lifetime spent balancing compassion with accountability. "Justice," he said, "is not a commodity for sale. It is a promise, one that belongs equally to the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless." The prosecutor, Jennifer Martinez, watched silently, her face steady but her eyes wet. Even Vincent Sterling, the defense lawyer who had once believed in loopholes more than morals, bowed his head. Judge Caprio continued, "When you stood in this courtroom weeks ago, you didn't show remorse. You showed contempt for this court, for the law, and for every citizen whose life you endangered. You acted as though your money was armor. But today, Mr. Whitmore, you'll learn that justice needs no permission to pierce that armor." He lifted the sentencing document. "I hereby sentence you to 3 years in state prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving 18 months, only if you complete a substance abuse rehabilitation program and show genuine accountability for your actions. Upon release, you will serve 5 years of probation. Any violation during that period will return you to prison to serve the remainder of your sentence. Your driver's license is permanently revoked for 10 years. And the court orders you to pay $50,000 to a fund supporting victims of drunk driving." The words fell one after another, deliberate, unwavering, final. Each sentence was a mirror, showing Brandon everything he'd refused to see. The real cost of arrogance. Brandon's composure cracked. Tears spilled freely down his face. For the first time, he wasn't crying for himself. He was crying because he finally understood. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. Judge Caprio's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Mr. Whitmore," he said gently, "regret means little when spoken at the gates of consequence. What matters is who you become beyond them." The gavel came down. Once, sharp, echoing, final. In the back row, Brandon's father lowered his head, his hand covering his eyes. His mother wept quietly. For years, they had protected him from every mistake. Until now. Now, even their love couldn't shield him from the truth. No one is above the law. As officers stepped forward to escort Brandon away, the young heir turned one last time toward Judge Caprio. Their eyes met, and for a brief, fleeting moment, arrogance gave way to gratitude. He nodded once, silently, as if saying thank you for finally stopping me. The judge returned the nod, almost imperceptibly. Then he looked toward the clerk and said simply, "Next case." But no one moved, because everyone in that room, the prosecutors, the defendants waiting their turn, even the guards, had just witnessed something rare. They had seen justice stand taller than money. That afternoon, news spread through Providence like wildfire. Judge Caprio sends billionaire's son to prison. Within hours, headlines across the country carried the story. By nightfall, clips of the hearing were circulating online, watched by millions. People didn't just cheer for punishment. They cheered for principle, for fairness, for courage. It wasn't just another court ruling. It was a reminder that the law doesn't kneel to wealth, and that sometimes the strongest thing a judge can give isn't mercy, it's accountability. And as Brandon Whitmore was led through those courtroom doors in handcuffs, reporters shouting his name, flashbulbs flickering, one truth cut through the noise. For the first time in his life, he was finally free, not from prison, but from the illusion that he was untouchable. It's been 3 months since the gavel fell in Judge Caprio's courtroom. The headlines that once screamed with outrage had faded, replaced by a quieter kind of story, one about change. Behind the walls of the Rhode Island Correctional Facility, the man who once believed he was untouchable had learned what it meant to feel small and finally human. Every morning, Brandon Whitmore woke to the metallic rattle of the cell door and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He swept floors. He served meals. He listened to stories from men whose lives had been written by struggle, not privilege. And slowly, something inside him began to shift. He stopped introducing himself as Whitmore. He started listening. When another inmate spoke about losing his family to a drunk driver, Brandon didn't have words, only silence and shame. Because for the first time, he saw himself not as a victim of consequence, but as the cause of it. On the outside, the world was still talking. The video of his courtroom collapse had crossed 70 million views. People called it the day justice finally spoke. Comment after comment praised a judge who didn't bow to money. Finally, someone stood up for the law. Every rich kid who thinks rules don't apply, watch this. But beneath the viral fame was something more profound. The story reminded millions that true justice isn't loud, it's steady. It doesn't humiliate, it humbles. When Brandon's release day arrived, he stepped out of the prison gates with no cameras waiting, no luxury car idling at the curb. His father stood alone, hands in his coat pockets. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. Then the father opened his arms. Brandon hesitated, then walked forward, breaking down in his father's embrace. No words were needed. They both understood that the greatest inheritance a parent can give isn't wealth, it's wisdom. And sometimes wisdom only grows in the ruins of pride. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the Providence courthouse addressed to Judge Caprio. It was from Brandon. Your Honor. It read, "You were right. Mercy without accountability is meaningless. I thought money made me powerful, but it only made me blind. I've enrolled in a rehabilitation program and plan to start a foundation for victims of drunk driving. If even one life is saved, maybe something good can come from my mistakes. Thank you for being the first person who ever told me no." Judge Caprio read the letter slowly, placed it down, and for a moment smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of quiet peace, the kind that comes when justice does exactly what it's meant to do, not just punish, but restore. Outside the courthouse that day, the December air was crisp again. Another winter, another sunrise over Providence. And as the light spilled through courthouse windows, it touched the worn wooden bench where thousands had stood before. Different stories, different mistakes, but one timeless truth. No one, not the rich, not the powerful, not the privileged, stands above the law.